Hey everybody, it's Bust with our patch note review for the 3.6 patch. This is the big champion adjustment patch that Riot alluded to in the roadmap, and it's got quite a few changes in it. And so before we dive in, I do want to make note that this is an extensive amount of changes. There's not a ton of big reworks in here. They did mention some champion reworks. I don't feel like that I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it feels like a bit of an exaggeration. But it seems like if we even look at like the previous patch, all of these changes comprehensively are going to make us a new and interesting format. And so I'm curious as to how this plays out, just as a bit of preface before we jump in. If we look at the previous patch and say like a deck like Lurk, as to where the changes to the Lurk deck were just a minor nerf to Pike. Pike lost a point of attack. A minor nerf to the high toughness dude. He lost a point of health, and that was it. And the Lurk deck jumped from being what was like, I wouldn't call it a tier one. It was probably like a tier 1.5, a tier 2 deck. It was running it kind of like a 53% win rate or so. And with those minor changes, it's dropped down into like the 47s and the 48s. It's a definite loser in the current format, and so we have to kind of like stop and ask ourselves: was it the minor changes to Lurk that really dropped it that hard? Or was it the kind of comprehensive changes to the format? The changes to the Sun Disk are certainly big. The Lurk deck kind of struggles against the concepts that are happening in the Sun Disk deck. Was it the changes to the Bandle City? Was it strong against Bandle City? Like it's a big, shake up to the format where, at a glance, only a couple of cards were changed very minorly, and so it wasn't like excuse me, as we'll see with the Bandle tree, where it just gets kind of nerfed into oblivion. Those were very, very small changes, and it was pretty much small changes across the board, but it was a big format warper, especially in terms of the Sun Disk coming to prominence and the Sun Disk really squelching a lot of decks out of the format. And so, I'm curious to see what happens. If you're over as a Teamfight Tactics player, lots and lots of people like to bitch about the amount of changes that get made to Teamfight Tactics because there'll be 50 and 60 units in the game, and they're not afraid to mess and tweak and edit like 30 and 40 of those units, and it really changes the meta every time that Riot gets in there and pokes their fingers at stuff. And so I don't play it enough to have a real opinion on the matter. I think the game's fun and fine. I don't play it enough to bitch about it incessantly on Reddit. But this is the kind of a theme that we're seeing here with Riot, at least in these more recent patches, as to where they're willing to get in there and poke around and mess with things and do some edits. And I'm pleased. I'm happy. I bitch about a lot of stuff, but I don't think that's one of the things I'll I'll bitch about at the moment. I think it's pretty sweet. And so, anyways, to jump on in, we'll go through all of the notes here, log in and get your rewards. Good job for you. And so, the thing that I think has been really sweet that Riot has kind of taken upon themselves to start doing is just adding new cards to the game. Nobody does this, right? You certainly can't do this with Magic. You can't say, "Hey, paper players, here's a fucking new card," right? They are not getting this kind of love and attention, and even games that could do it, like Hearthstone, just have never done this to the best of my knowledge. And I think this is absolutely fantastic. Just as a way to not forget about the older cards and the older archetypes and the older keywords and everything. One of the things that I was always curious about was, say, with like the archetype of spiders, right? Spiders was in the Foundation set. It didn't see anything in the Bilgewater set. I think it saw stuff in the Targon set. It might have been the Targon set to where they started to print the Soul Spinner and the Arachnoid attack and boost all your guys kind of things. I don't remember exactly when those came out. But from like a design perspective, that's kind of distracting, right? If you're releasing new cards, you really want to focus on the new keywords and the new themes and the new champions. And it kind of sucks to be like, oh, well, here on the side, over here to the edge is an extra spider card. Be happy, Elise fans. And so I think it's super interesting and super cool that Riot is coming out here and adding new cards to the format. So as we'll see here with Might of the Vanguard, they're giving some elite support to the format without having to come out here and print new elite cards, right? Yes, and they did recently print Jarvan. Jarvan got some elite support, but if you're wanting to give the archetype or the keyword some love, it's kind of tough to do, right? Do they really want to wait until they're gonna print their next elite style champion before they print more elite cards? Probably not. And so I love that they're jumping in and doing this. This is pretty sweet. And so, in terms of Might of the Vanguard, it is kind of an interesting one. It says it costs 3 mana, but that's a bit of a lie. It says to play, spend all of your mana, summon a Dauntless Vanguard, and grow its stats to that amount. If 9 or more mana was spent, give everything else +2/+2, or all of your other elites +2/+2. And I initially had to like double take on this. I was like, hang on, you get to play all of your mana, and you get the Dauntless Vanguard, which is a 3/3. So I was like, you're really just going to give us a 0 mana 3/3? That's not the case, but I think this is an interesting curve filler. This one is going to kind of depend on the meta as to how viable it is. As we look at the current meta and the dominance of the Sun Disk, just playing stats on the board can't beat the Sun Disk. The Sun Disk deck will crush that every time. Will that happen here in the future? Well, it caught some nerfs, so we'll see if that still stands. But as the formats have kind of shown us currently and shown us in the past, you have to be able to either attack through your opponents with Overwhelm, you have to be able to attack around them with Elusive, or you have to be able to attack twice with Rallies. And cards like Might of the Vanguard are what would have to fall in that kind of attack twice camp. But if you're looking to attack twice with a rally, you can't do that after you just spent all of your mana. And so I think this one might be kind of a dud, just given the current meta, but it could potentially have a chance to shine on, say, like you're playing elites and what do you do on turn 4? Right? If you want to just say spend your 2 banked spell mana plus that 4 mana to get a 6/6 on board, that's not a bad deal, right? And so it has some kind of opportunities there. As we've kind of looked in the past at decks, say with like Lux, and we're wanting to just spend 6 mana kind of at any cost, this gives us another option there as well. Typically, we would just play cards like Remembrance in terms of activating Lux. But this card does, pull off a lot of things in terms of you can play it early just to get a dude on board. You can play it late to activate a Lux or activate a Jace or something. And so it certainly has some uses outside of just elites, but I think in the context of just being an elites-based card, this one's not going to see too much play. Into the next one, we've got the For Glory, and this is one that's a little bit tougher for me to wrap my brain around. The reputation is kind of tough to pull off, just in general, not specifically with this card, but if we're thinking of reputation in general, that's where you strike with a unit with 5 attack 4 or more times. A lot of times you just won the game at that point, right? It's very tough for your opponent to take that kind of beating and then still be around to talk about it later. And so it's kind of tough to find these spaces to where you're actually getting the discount on this kind of card. And I think when it comes to these reputation cards, we have to kind of look at it as, is the best thing good enough? And so is paying 3 mana for 2 5/1s a good enough card that when we have to play it as just the regular card, the 6 mana thing for the smaller units, does that make up for it? And with this, it's tough. The Glory Seekers are pretty powerful. That's the 5/1 Challenger can't block. It does put a ton of stats on the board. It does let you kind of make up some space if you have some just leftover spell mana, but I think this isn't enough to make me actually want to come out here and play reputation cards. I think the way that these reputation decks kind of come together nicely is if either both of your champions really do it well, and so say you're playing with like LeBlanc and something else, and you're just kind of like incidentally getting there, or if you're doing something like Yetis, right? Yetis was a fantastic way to come out and activate reputation, but it's tough to get all of these themes together, though, right? If you're playing Yetis, it can be kind of tough to play all of the Yeti activators and then fit in some reputation cards as well. And so this is another one. I don't think it's quite going to find a home. There's not too many Noxus decks that are really happy, for this kind of ability, at least the ones that exist now. But, again, there are some kind of side uses for this, right? You can play it in Heimerdinger or, Spells Matter style decks. You can find some other kind of homes for this thing other than just strictly playing around the reputation keyword. And so it's again, it's another one I don't think we're going to be too excited about. I'm curious as to what unit I would get excited about. Like if we're making Trifari and Glory Seekers and we aren't happy, what would we be happy with? It was like Armored Elephant. If we're playing Armored Elephants off of this thing, that would be pretty sweet. But no, I don't think like Trifari and Glory Seeker is quite the unit I want to be creating with this one. And then with our last one, though, this is what I find to be an interesting card. Inner Beast, burst 2-cost thing to give a unit +1/+1 and then create a stance swap in hand. And there's a couple of different takes on this, right? The initial one is this just better than Troll Chant? And that's tough, right? Troll Chant gives you, the defensive option. It's a fairly easy 2-for-1, right? We're playing tons of decks in the current meta right now, mainly Darius Nara style decks, as to where our big game plan is to play a 2-drop, play another 2-drop, and then play a Troll Chant. Then the idea is that you're going to get both of your 2s into combat. You're going to play the Troll Chant, kill both of your opponent's units while you're survive. And so that is a extremely, extremely powerful play. But with things like Inner Beast, it does, come out and immediately replace itself. It puts the stance swap in your hand, which is kind of a good early, good late kind of thing. Like Troll Chant is fairly bad in the late game as to where this card should be never bad. But you lose out on that early, that quick 2-for-1 potential. You lose out on that ability to snowball the board. But the stance swaps are quite powerful on their own, and it does help support Udyr as a champion. There's been some other decks that just play the stance swaps incidentally. So say you're playing like a Lee Sin-based deck, and you want to get the 2 spells out of the Inner Beast plus the stance swap, and then give your Lee Sin Overwhelm. You got some options there, but I think this is the one that we're going to have to kind of play around with a bit, poke with it a bit, see how it goes. The big thing I should say with Inner Beast is either if we're playing this deck or playing against it or playing against Freylord in general now, typically the only combat tricks you really worried about from Freylord were you would play around Troll Chant, and then you would play around Three Sisters. Three Sisters being important that it could generate the Frostbite or it could generate Fury of the North. But you typically never saw your opponents play Fury of the North unless they're playing Sejuani and hitting it off of the flip. And where this tangent is going those are the only ways to give your units plus attack. And so for the most part, you always felt very safe getting into combat with Freylord. You might say, okay, well, you're not going to, I might not win this combat, but I'm not going to lose it, right? We might get our 3/3 into battle with our opponent's 2/2, and you say, okay, well, if you have a Troll Chant to survive, fine, you played a card to make your unit live, but I didn't lose mine, so at the end of the day, that was pretty okay. But the Inner Beast now brings out the option of our opponent being able to win a combat or us win a combat against a bigger unit. And so that is one of the things that we'll have to kind of keep in mind with Inner Beast is that it may not be the most powerful card, right? It may not be the strongest card in terms of combat tricks, but it does give Freylord a tool that it doesn't currently have, one that it hasn't had in the past. And so it makes the combats a little bit more interesting in terms of the Freylord decks. So, all in all, pretty cool. Like, the Inner Beast, I think, out of the new cards will be the big one, right? If we're looking at the previous set with, like, the Desert Duel and the Rocket Barrage and the Stun thing, those didn't really have an impact on the format. I kind of feel the same about the Might of the Vanguard and the For Glory, but I think Inner Beast is going to be seeing some play here, especially in the coming week when people are going to be really excited to be playing with Udyr. So, all in all, pretty cool stuff. So, moving on down, we're hitting the card updates. This is the big section of champion updates. There's a big bunch of them here. We'll go through all of them. And this is what I'm, really interested in and seeing how things play out. As we looked at again, like in the previous patch, where there are just a bunch of changes across the board, are any of these changes enough now to really bring things and to making a different meta and bringing new decks to the forefront? And so it is kind of interesting with Ashe, right? She used to have to see the Frostbites. Now she just has to see enemies with 0 power. And so I don't think that is ultra relevant at the moment. The big thing in terms of Ashe with this right now is Troll Chant, right? Troll Chant can reduce an opponent's attack to 0 or 1. That used to not count for Ashe. It does now in terms of this. And so I don't feel like that's enough to make me want to run out and build an Ashe deck, but it certainly makes her much more powerful, and it's tough to argue against her flip being not powerful. Her flip is very, very powerful, and so she could push up a little bit to the forefront. The other thing to kind of keep in mind with this is I feel like at some point in the future, Riot is really going to push forth the fearsome thing in Sherima. You'll see that with Nasus. We'll talk about Nasus for a bit. We do see a lot of cards in Sherima that pass out the negative attack. There's the Rite of Dominance, there's Exhaust, there's Nasus's Flip, there's the expensive like 6 or 7 mana dude that shrinks your opponent's team. It's not surprising to think that in the future there may be some amount of support to the negative attack archetype that positively impacts Ashe. And so while this may not be a big upgrade now, this is certainly something to watch for in the future. So we'll have to definitely keep that one in mind. Moving on, the Darius is what people are going to be bitching about. If the opponent's Nexus has less than half of its starting health, then he gets the flip. This is a Path of Champions based update. For those of us playing Constructed, it's not that big of a deal. But if you play it against an opposing deck starting with 40 health, you only have to take them to 20 now instead of 10 to get the Darius to flip. Like, it is what it is. People are going to be upset that they marked Darius for a change, and on the ladder, this is functionally not a change. Get over it, okay? Jesus Christ, get over it. All right, on to the next one. Galio's level 2 now boosts him up to 10 health instead of 8, which is fine and makes sense, right? Every champion gets +1/+1 on level up, so they get the 2 bonus stats. Galio was only getting a point of toughness, and so they have corrected that. He now gets 2 points of health. Not a big change. I have never cared about Galio's health. The game is always over at that point. And so, what may lead to be one of the biggest changes in the game is the update to Garen. And so, on his both summon and flip, when he is summoned, he gives the other allies +1/+1 this round. And so, yeah, this is an incredibly powerful ability. Garen, I think, has kind of been like on the edge of being good enough. You know, costing 5 mana is a very dangerous place to be. You start competing with the expensive epics that just kind of come out and win the game. And so you have to kind of ask yourself where it's like, well, you know, do I really want to build around Garen, or would I rather just play Cytherea? And if I'm just going to play Cytherea, then that just opens me up to playing other champions, where the champion is the big focal point of your deck. And so Garen getting this boost, you know, does make him the real deal, right? His flip ability is quite strong, getting the rally every turn. And I think this might be enough to push him up over the edge. Now, the things with Garen, though, is I don't think I'm particularly interested in Garen in terms of elites. I still just can't really like wrap my brain around elites being good. What it always interests me with Garen are the cards that generate multiple cards. And so say like boards with like Marai Wardens and boards with the 4-drop scout thing that you play in the Misfortune decks. Those are all, you know, fantastic targets to give big bonuses to, right? Anytime that you can boost 6 units instead of 5, that's better, right? And so those kind of things. And then it also interests me with cards like Petricite Broadwing as to where you can potentially heal it, and you can get in to some really favorable combats once you're out here and passing around these bonus stats. And so I think the Garen is arguably the biggest change out of the champions in this patch. But again, I don't think it's a big boost for elites. We'll certainly put together an elites deck and give it a try or two, but I think this is just more interesting in terms of what if we assemble this deck that plays a bunch of go wide cards early, and then we still have access to the likes of Garen and Cytherea and Genvivi and Vanguard Bannerman just coming out and boosting the entire board. Just quite powerful stuffs out of that summon ability to boost your whole team. So good stuff, Garen. Well done, my dude. Moving on, Karma now generates the extra spell forever. I thought this was something that was always like questionable in Expedition, right? In Expedition, you would want to play Karma. You'd sit around and generate the spells, and then she would flip, and you'd be like, oh, fuck, I don't have any spells to play, right? It was ultimately just like a real bummer of an experience. And On the flip side of the coin as well, if you're waiting until you have 10 mana crystals for something to happen, that something should be pretty powerful. And granted, Karma does a lot of cool stuff on her flip. You get to double up your spells and do neat things, but for it to be constructed viable and not just be completely centered around doing some kind of dumb combo, I think adding in this create a spell thing every turn is pretty good. Give her a chance to come back, give the control decks a chance to do something. They can sit around and play their shitty Ionia spells all day, but I think it's interesting there. I guess this is another place to where I don't know what the deal is with Karma and Path of Champions. I've played through it a few times, but not enough for it to be memorable. And if people are always bitching about Karma, I'm sure that this will just fuel the fire even more. She probably did not need a boost in terms of the Path of Champions. But on to the next one, our girl Katarina. Not quite a workaround or a rework. There we go. But she does generate the blade's edges on her fleeting side or on her flip side now, which is pretty powerful. This is one of these things that I think is going to be kind of faded on and ignored. Katarina is an extremely, extremely powerful champion. You just have to kind of like find these spots for her though, to where you can actually fit her in a deck. Right, any of the decks, looking for rallies and stuff and getting multiple rallies are all pretty powerful. But finding the right home is something that it's just not really worked out these days. And in large part that is because it's like you spend all this mana, we're playing all of these rallies, and then our opponents can still come out and just like block with their smaller units. And so getting this additional Blade's Edge is quite nice, even if it's just a matter of throwing it to face or throwing at their units. Getting these extra bonuses is certainly worthwhile. And this is a champion we'll definitely look to play around with a bit in the future. I think this is an ability that is. I'm trying to think of the right word for it. It seems kind of innocuous, but I think it's going to be kind of big. I think that's where it gets us. It's just a matter of finding the right Noxus home for Katarina to live in. Okay, and then another of the big ones in LeBlanc. And so LeBlanc now puts the mirror image in hand on summon instead of just waiting until the 15 damage. And I think this is the one that has quite a bit of potential as well. Let me take a moment and get all of these cards pulled up. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Mirror Image, here it is up on your screen now. 2-mana slow spell, summon an ephemeral copy of an ally with 5+ power. Now, thing number one with this, I've never had this come up. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but Riot is changing how some of these spellcasts work. I don't think this is positively or was negatively affected as to where if you cast Mirror Image onto LeBlanc, and then your opponent Mystic Shots LeBlanc, I'm not sure if the Mirror Image still does the proper summon. I've cast this spell like twice. It's just never been relevant because you typically just win the game once LeBlanc's been flipped. But that could be one of the positive aspects to it now, is to where you can't just fizzle out the Mirror Image. We'll touch on that more as the patch notes roll along, but that is thing number one. Making these cheaper is also quite interesting. It's not very challenging to get that 15 damage in with LeBlanc when she's been flipped. Again, the game is usually over at that point, but getting these cheaper is definitely better than making them cost 2 mana forever. And then the card that kind of excites me about this is Incisive Tactician. We are seeing, all these bonuses and boosts to reputation. The kind of combo, if you will, with Incisive Tactician is when he's summoned, you get to rally. If you copy him with Mirror Image, then you're going to get another rally. And so you shouldn't need to do that a whole ton. But as you could imagine, if you have the Incisive Tactician on board, a copy of him on board, and a LeBlanc on board, you should be able to just cycle through these over and over and over again, and then just kind of kill your opponent with this rally-based OTK. And so this is one of the things to where I don't know, currently where we stand in terms of reputation, but when we're coming through all these changes and seeing a little bit of change here and a little bit of change there and getting a new reputation card and LeBlanc getting an upgrade, these are the kind of things as to where this deck starts to become real. And so do I think this reputation Mirror Image combo thing is going to exist and be powerful? Time will tell. But that doesn't mean that like a set down the future when another card comes out that really pushes reputation over the top, that you don't have to come back and revisit this. And so I think this is a bigger boost than people are giving it credit for. People are going, her LeBlanc's not that upgraded. She's supposed to get completely reworked. And it's like, well, maybe that is a bit facetious coming from Riot calling this a complete rework, but there's no denying that this is incredibly powerful. And even if it's not just some weird combo that we're trying to pull off, getting a leveled up LeBlanc and having these mirror images for your next attack is extremely powerful. And so I think this is definitely big and definitely good. I think overall, the big problem with LeBlanc is she only has 2 health and dies to Mystic Shot. And so it doesn't have anything to really do with her kit as much as just having her with 2 health on her front side. But that's, the big risk reward you pay, and so is what it is. On to the next one. Leona's flip has Overwhelm now. That's positive, I guess. I've never played Leona in Constructed. In Expedition, she always just had Overwhelm anyways from the Zenith Blades, but a boost never hurts. And, as we drone on and on and on about these formats, what you tend to see are you can't just put stats on the board, right? That's what worries me about all the elites and trying to make elites good. Historically and throughout time, just putting stats on the board and using that as your card advantage and your game winning engine just isn't good enough. And that was in large part what would happen to the Daybreak decks. You would get Leona down, you'd play Ravun, you would boost your life back up with the 5/4 lifesteal dude, but then you still just couldn't deal any damage to your opponent. You would have to get ready for this full combo of stuns to stun your opponent's whole board and attack through that way. Adding in these overwhelms just directly onto Leona, definitely important, and definitely gives her an additional path to victory that doesn't make it feel like you have to play a big OTK deck. And so, all in all, pretty cool. I think it's good that she gets an upgrade. Perhaps it brings her forth into a little bit more relevance now that she's got the Overwhelm attached to her attack. Coming in with Malphite, he now gets to stun a unit on play. That's fine. It's tough on turn 7 to really find these angles for that, right? If it's usually around turn 7 or turn 8 or turn 9 and you're playing Malphite, your opponent's probably just going to open on you anyways. But, it's a boost and he needs it. I feel like he is in this space to where his flip just wins you the game. And so it is nice to give him a little bit of a boost to help you get to that flip. I mean, his summon 10 mana of landmarks thing is kind of tough to pull off now. Maybe in the future, if there's more landmarks, it won't be as bad, but I really don't want to be playing, what is it, Daybreak Arena, whatever, Rock Ruins, is whatever that one is called. I don't want to play that in Constructed. And so that was the All-Star in an Expedition, not so much here. And so I don't feel like Malphite's super relevant, but this could be quite relevant in Path of Champions and stuff as well. We do have to admit that is a game mode and people do play it. Onward and upwards, Nasus has Fearsome on his front side. Again, we kind of alluded to this with Ashe. This is something that I could see being relevant more so in the future, to where you're playing a lot of unit shrinking style cards. Then you're using that to get your Fearsome attacks in with Shurima. And that kind of, now lends to that theme with Nasus having the Fearsome on his front side. And I think that's all around generally pretty healthy, and so I think that's a pretty good boost for the dog. See if Thresh. I don't think it's enough to bring Thresh Nasus back, but as we kind of look towards the future and look towards the next set and 2 sets down the road or whatever, I could definitely see this Shurima shrink him up thing being relevant, and Nasus having Fearsome is going to be extremely pivotal for that to work. The next, what could be one of the bigger changes in the set, the flip side of Nocturne now gives the negative on summon instead of on play. And so now if you're playing terrible cards like Haunted Relic, you get to give your -3 attack to your opponent's board, to whereas you used to have to play cards directly from your hand. Where I would suspect that this has the most potential would be with cards like the Harrowing. You could definitely set up a board to where you have a dead Nocturne and you win with the Harrowing. I don't exactly know how that plays out in terms of lining up your units for summons, but that definitely feels like a pretty reasonable OTK. The The other kind of piece to the puzzle with this is I always wondered like how much we could use expedition as a means to kind of predict the future with the game. We did see some various archetypes come out that would kind of predict what was going to happen in the future. If you really kind of looked into it and read into the lore and stuff, you could kind of figure out, and it would make sense when the next set would come out. You'd be like, oh, that's why you did that dumb stuff a while ago. And one of the things that had always kind of interested me was why is there the Black Mist Nocturne? I can't remember exactly when it came about, but it didn't come out with the initial set. To the best of my knowledge, it's been a while now, but I'm pretty sure there was the Nocturne Diana set directly when the set came out, and then at some point in the future, they decided to add the Black Mist Nocturne to the game, which was the Mist Wraiths based deck with Nocturne. And now that we see like Nocturne get this upgrade to summon, and that we see the Mist Wraith pairing in Expedition, and then having cards like Wraithcaller that summon the Mist Wraiths to the board. So now if you have this flipped Nocturne, you get to play the Mistcaller or the Wraithcaller, whatever. It summons the little guy that gives your opponent's units -2 attack. And you have a lot more potential to come in and get a bunch of attacks in. And so I'm curious if at some point in the future we'll see a little bit more Mist Wraith coverage. And if this change was something that kind of leads to it. But it also allows for cards now like Risen Mists to shrink up our opponents as well. And so I'm curious, it's one of those things. We saw a bit of it with like the Rumble, and such. And so I'm curious if something like that happens with Nocturne as well. So, on to the next one. Scion catches a point of attack. That's more than fine. I think the previous nerf was healthy and important. I don't remember what his stats even were. I thought he was like a 4-6 on the front and then a 10 on the back. But it was very easy for his front side to be like an 8 attack or something. Scion is one that it's kind of tough for me. In Magic, there was a concept years and years and years ago. I think it might have been something that Kibler floated or one of the pros floated, but as to where if Baneslayer Angel was a good card, then it was a healthy format. And basically what that alluded to was Baneslayer Angel would be like a 5-mana, 5/5 elusive lifelink quick attack. Protection from demons. That does sound a bit obnoxious in the context of Runeterra, but it is basically just like a big, meaty, statty kind of unit that wouldn't immediately kill your opponent and would allow for a lot of back and forth to happen in the game. And I feel like if we kind of, port that idea over to Runeterra, that would be looking at something like is this a meta where like Darius is healthy, right? Can we have a lot of unit combats? Darius loves it when you get to make a big open attack and get him flipped in the middle of combat. He's kind of expensive, so your opponent has lots of play with it. I feel like he's a fun and interactive unit, even though he has a very game-ending flippability. I don't feel like we quite get that same feeling out of Scion, right? His flippability is a bit obnoxious, and I think he just wins the game too fast, too often, without enough counterplay to it, right? You can't even play cards like Whimsy on Scion because he's a champion. And so I worry about him being tweaked too much. And I don't feel like there's ever enough distinction between Scion and Darius as well. It's like once Scion gets too good, you just never play Darius. And so I'm no master of balance, but I would like to think that the discard ability on Scion makes up for the times to where he's not as strong as Darius, but that's a tough line to toe. And so I don't feel like him boosting up this 1 point of stat is going to be enough to make Scion obnoxious again, but it's a tough call, It's when you're asking yourself what does one stat mean? It's tough to tell, and so we'll see. I can't tell if that's typoed either. Well, he only needs to get to 9 to flip. I guess that makes sense. I was gonna say I saw the max at +7. He used to need to get up to 10. Now he only gets to 9. I guess that makes sense, and it's fine. And okay, so here you go. The big change of the format in Udyr. This is the one that surprised me on release. Like, if you're familiar with the League of Legends or Teamfight Tactics or whatever, you should be like fairly familiar with Udyr's thing being like morphing between the different animal forms. And I thought it was like really weird that his flip ability had nothing to do with the stances. And so seeing your opponent deal damage his opponent's Nexus 7 times is kind of dumb. Like it makes sense in terms of the like 1 damage ping things coming out of Freylord, but that feels like a Freylord champion and not like Udyr, right? It's like we're building stats to fill, we're building abilities and mechanics to fit into Freylord, and we're not building them to be true to the champion. And so I'm definitely glad that they came in and made him care about stance swaps. Whether or not that's good, you know, I'm kind of up in the air on that. But he does have, quite a lot of powers coming to him, especially if you consider a lot of these games we look at, with like, say, Pantheon. Maybe we'll play a Pantheon early, attack, get a couple trades, we'll get a 2-for-1, he dies, and then we'll just play another one later after we've already got like 6 or 7 targets. Like, what if we apply that kind of concept to Udyr, right? We've played a turn 2 thing to generate a stance. He comes into play, he makes it cost 0, he gets a strike, and we get a different one. Maybe we play that strike somewhere else, and then like 3 or 4 turns down the road, we play the ultimate form Udyr that now has like +3/+3 or +4/+4. We play the overwhelm stance and win the game. Those kind of things should be relevant now, right? He should be more than just a stance generator that you want to put the stance onto Lee Sin or something, or put the stance onto Vi. And so I think this is definitely a positive change. Worth noting as well, he did catch a point of attack, and so he activates Reputation now if you want. But more importantly, he can do battle with some of the meteor units. That 4/4 was just really kind of an awkward space. And that he couldn't take down quite enough units without a stance. And so I think he'll be much more relevant in those terms as well. But on the kind of downside of all this, he does suffer from that same thing to where we talked about Garen, as to where this is a 5-cost champion. It needs to be doing work. And I'm not exactly certain how I feel about Udyr doing work. This is one of these kind of go tall mechanics, put a bunch of stances on me, make me a big powerful unit, and then just kind of falls flat if your opponent has stuns and such. And so if your opponent has a stun for Garen, you can still get a rally. If your opponent has a stun for Udyr, you've just made a huge investment with no payoff. And so we'll see. I don't think he's going to be the be-all, end-all. I do assure you, you're going to see a ton of Udyr over the next week in your laddering. But I think he'll kind of fall more into the niche space of interestingness and not a true ladder competitor. All right. And then our last champion change, Vladimir gets fearsome. I don't think it's enough to make him interesting. This mechanic just isn't that good. It's a powerful and dangerous one, right? You do really have to kind of like watch yourself in terms of this attack ability just doming your opponent. But I don't think that there's enough supporting cast for Vladimir to be good enough now. And I don't really feel like giving him fearsome solves the problem. I don't think you ever really cared about the Vladimir attack itself. You always cared more about the damage coming from his abilities. And so prove me wrong on that one. I think he's still garbage, but we'll eat our hat here in a week or two once Vladimir's at the top of the meta. Okay, and into the card changes. Ambush costs 1 more. I think Ambush should cost 4 mana. I don't think this kind of card should exist. It is nice that the elusive only comes from the putting a card into your hand kind of thing, but it feels a little bit too easy to do with things like ballistic bots sitting around and then using that to give your Vi's elusive. It just I like to look at a card and say, how does this create situations where both players are having fun? And I don't think Ambush does that ever, right? It's not a ton of fun for your opponent to ambush their Vi and blast you for 12 out of nowhere. And so, nerf this one into oblivion and I'll be okay with it. I haven't had a lot of negative feelings towards this on the ladder. It's just you have to be ready. You see that you're playing against Victor Vi and you're like, oh, guess you got me. That was fun. I thought we were playing a game, but we weren't. You just have to be like ready for that, and then you just say, okay, set that aside, and this is gone now. I just don't like cards like this existing. I don't like Ghost existing either. Onto Ballistic Bot, losing a point of attack. This is one that I think will be kind of interesting in terms of all the Victor decks running around. Ballistic Bot does actually care about the stats. There are enough fearsomes running around in the current format to where having 3 attack is relevant. And so that one turn of not having enough attack is big. Not being able to trade with your opponent's 2/1s and 1 health units is quite big as well. You also say your opponent goes, hey, here's my Ruin Runner or my Rockhopper. I always mix those two up. Your opponent's like, hey, here's my Rockhopper. You can't just play your Ballistic Bot into that. You're going to have to just going to straight up lose your unit. And so it is most certainly worse. And losing the point of attack is much, much worse in this case than losing the point of health, in my opinion. And so we'll see. I don't think this is enough to make people not want to play the base Victor decks, but this is the kind of change I'm talking about. That's like it's a small change here. It drives their win rate down just a little bit, and that might be enough to just completely nerf the deck into oblivion. I didn't do the math. People know how I do math. I do math fucking terribly, but someone on Reddit on one of the last patches or so basically, put forth if the change to this card makes you lose like 1 match in 50. That is, something that you could look at as dropping your win rate, the 2%. And I don't think it exactly works out like that, but the kind of idea is there. You may not immediately feel the change. A lot of games, this is still just going to win for you, but do you now lose a game that you would have won in the past, and how frequently does that happen? And just dropping your deck down 1 or 2 percentage points makes it not playable, right? Lurkers is, sure, you can play Lurkers, it's a fun deck, but in the current meta, Lurkers is a losing deck, right? And it just caught those 2 little nerfs, and now it's not in a place of winningness. And so, just these small changes to something like Ballistic Bot, taking a couple percentage points off a Victor deck, certainly can take it out of the forefront of the meta. On to the next one, Blood for Blood. In stark contrast to Ambush, I feel like Blood for Blood could cost 0 and still be reasonable. Having to have the unit that you want to copy already be on board, have that unit not die to this, and its ability not be like super over the top. Like, what do these cards do? I want to copy the the Crimson dude that makes more copies of Crimson things? Like, sure, I guess that's a thing you can do. Is it worth a card? So I don't know. Maybe there's a reason for this actually costing mana. Maybe there's a reason it shouldn't cost 0 and should cost 1. Sure, but I don't feel like the addition of Burst makes this playable. It certainly takes away a lot of the terrible aspects of it being a fast card, but I think that if this is supposed to be the Battle Scars kind of activator thing, then just make it cost 0. I don't know. That's my hot take on it. Okay, but the next big one of the format, the Sun Disk, now ascends 9 ranks as opposed to 10, and that is quite important. If the Sun Disk deck was, firing on all cylinders, it could flip the Sun Disk on turn 6. Right, you have your flipped Azir, you have your flipped Zerath. That's 10 or 20 ticks off of it. You need 5 turns of countdowns. That's from turn 2 to turn 6, and you have a flipped Sun Disk. Now, with it advancing 2 rounds later, it should, at a bare minimum, be turn 8. And so, if your opponent wants to go all in and play countdown reduction, that's a different story. But given the current iterations of the Sun Disk decks, this is the biggest change in the format. And so I don't think it'll be enough to completely nerf it out of the format. It's dropped down to about 10% of the meta these days, but this is going to be a big blow to the Sun Disk decks. And thank God, I am so tired of watching that movie. I can't imagine the decks in their current forms are going to want to add the countdown reduction. And so it should just become more of a niche deck and not a ladder monster that just crushes every control deck in the format. And so very glad to see this happen. Very, very good nerf. Tired of watching the movie. Just get that out of here. Okay. On to the next one. Callous Bone Crusher is kind of interesting. Not having Overwhelm was always his problem. And I think this one kind of like better illustrates the the concept I was trying to present with the new reputation card, in that when things are good with the Callous Bone Crusher, this is very good, right? A 3 mana 6/4 with Overwhelm is a spectacularly good deal, right? It's arguably more powerful than Ruin Runner, right? Losing out on the spell shield sucks, but it can now combat with every 3 attack unit in the game. And so that's a very powerful thing. You can also start brewing up in your brain piece these Shuriman Overwhelm decks, and that could certainly be a part of it. Now, when things go wrong, and you just have a 6 mana, a 6/4 for 4 mana, how bad does that feel? Well, not like super bad. I think it's kind of okay. To 10 stats for 4 mana is okay. It has the 4 health, so it survives the standard 3/3 for 3 kind of dilemma. And so I could certainly see Callous Bone Crusher being a real card, especially if you catch just like a little bit more support for reputation. It's like the support sucks in Shurima. There's the treasure seeker kind of guy, and there's Sivir, but you don't see the kind of support in Shurima like you do in Noxus, to where there's the big collection of Trifari and 5 attack units. And so I think the Bone Crusher, he's kind of an interesting story in that he was released and he was garbage, and then he was one of the cards that they actually buffed for the sole purpose of Expedition. They took it from 3 health up to 4 to make it Expedition relevant. They didn't think it was going to be constructed relevant, but let's make it Expedition relevant, and now potentially giving it a boost up into constructed relevance. These Shuriman Overwhelm decks have a lot of potential with these action starts and Bone Crushers and Ruin Runners, and then using the Absolver for your champions and stuff. There's a lot of real raw power there, and so I'm actually kind of curious about our lady friend, gender neutral warrior with large muscles is gonna bring to the table. All right, on to the next one. Hayara Allseer. To me, too expensive to be irrelevant. Like, I don't want it to be like that. Like, I try to think of, as a base, if this is a 7/7 Overwhelm for 6 that could potentially do other stuff, would you want to play it? I mean, probably not. Spreading out the stats is important, but historically, this is just kind of the ability you're not looking for. And so if you need like the full build around stance stuff for Udyr, you might be kind of like forced to play this. But the next step of that equation is, do I really want to force Udyr that hard to where I have to play a card this bad? And so, Udyr better be doing a lot of winning while he's flipped, and I just don't see that, right? If he was like a Lee Sin power type card, then sure, maybe I'd be interested. I just feel like Udyr is the support. He's the bread to the sandwich, right? He's not really the meat, and so I can't really get behind this one being good. On to the next one. Swiftwing Lancer is elite. Makes sense. I was always surprised this dude wasn't elite. Maybe that made sense when Foundations was out, but now that more cards are around, it's not that big of a deal. I can't remember if there's any other elite generators, right, where this guy creates a random elite. I can't think of any immediately, and so I'm not going to bother looking it up because this guy's just not playable. On to the next one. The Bandle Tree does catch a bit of a change. It has to see the regions come into play now. That should essentially remove the OTK aspects of this. You can't do that stuff to where you just play all of the dudes early and then follow up with the tree to get the last 2 and 3 that you need. And so it should be more of a unit generation engine that also has a win condition attached to it. And so I think that this could have probably realistically been dropped even more in price, but it's probably worth playing it safe with. These style of OTK things I think that they should almost always be fringe playable at best. And having the Bandle Tree be a real deck was, I feel like, too much. Especially to where if you said, okay, the Bandle Tree is too much, I want to play Landmark Destruction, and the Landmark Destruction didn't really do anything. Like, yes, your opponent could just play a second, well, they would have to draw the second Bandle Tree, but it was still kind of like a real feels bad moment if you specifically play your Scorched Earth to kill the Bandle Tree, and they're like, ha ha ha, nice try, fella. Here's another one, and it just just is a mana investment and not a true counter. All right, and on to the Vanguard Squire. I think this one could find itself being relevant, right, as we're talking about the two different concepts of needing a lot of width for the likes of Garen to really pop off on those abilities. Very easy to get units on the board if they're free, and excuse me, the second kind of concept of how bad is it when it's bad. And so spending 4 mana on a 3/3 was absolutely terrible, right? If it was say turn 7 of the game and you drew it, sure you could play it, but it would often just rot in your hand as you had to like make the decision of do I want to play this 6-drop or do I want to try and play this this overcosted 3/3. And so this doesn't like necessarily fix the problems of drawing it late. Paying 3 for a 3/3 isn't really what you want to do, but that's what you would be doing at that stage of the game anyways with pretty much any 3/3 that isn't like Vanguard Sergeant. And so we'll see. It's not that bad when it's bad, but the places where this is good could be quite interesting. If you just envision some kind of curve to where you want to play a Vanguard Bannerman into Garen or Garen into Cythria, getting that free unit on the board is pretty big. Or even if it's just a 1 mana thing to where you on turn 6 play this for 1 and then Garen, or play Garen and play this for 0 or whatever. The options are there to cheat this on the board, and costing 1 less mana is pretty good when those cheats don't work out how you want. And so interesting card. Again, like just putting stats on the board doesn't feel good enough to me. You need a rally to go with it, but some definite promise coming out of the Vanguard Squire. And the last one, the Yordles in Arms. Everyone on Reddit knew. When the last patch came out, everyone said, devs, you are so stupid. How dumb could you be? Me and my infinite wisdom knew what a broken card Yordles in Arms was. You didn't do anything about it. You're the worst devs ever. Not really too much hyperbole there. Like, as soon as the patch notes came out, everybody says, oh my god, I can't believe you didn't nerf Yordles in Arms. This has been my bane so hard. And it's not that bad, right? I don't play against it too frequently. Again, like the big problem with Yordles in Arms is just the small combo of Poro Cannon plus Fizz, right? You have Poro Cannon, you have Fizz, that gives you 3 elusives for 16 power, right? And so it's very easy to just kind of OTK the opponent from that space. Not so much the problem as to where they have a full board and play Yordles in Arms. And so I think this buff, or this nerf, is okay. I didn't think it was that bad in the past. I'm glad they didn't take the route of making it like 5 regions instead of 4. I think that they picked 4 regions, and that's good. And so that you don't have to play mental gymnastics of how many regions has my opponent played. Is it 4? Is it 5? Do I have to worry about Yordles in Arms as compared to this other card based on the number of regions they've played? And so glad that they kept a little consistency there. And I just don't think it was really a problem. I mean, we played it's like 2 or 3% of the meta with the Lulu Fizz deck, and so it certainly wasn't super oppressive. I think it was probably just seen so much because Bandle City was in such a powerful spot. I'm actually really kind of curious how Bandle City decks would have turned out with just the Sun Disk thing coming out. I have to imagine that if your game plan is to just play a bunch of Pokey Sticks and a bunch of value cards and Conchologist into Wallop, or Loping Telescope into like a card generator or something, and you're trying to take that against the Sun Disk in its prime. I'm curious how much of that Bandle City stuff would have just gotten squelched out with the addition of the Sun Disk. And so, food for thought. That's just one of those things to where the small changes in these formats can really make a big difference. And so, always worth keeping in note that while these changes may not feel like a lot individually on each card, like the Yordles and Arms change is fairly big for a single card, but like Vanguard Squire and Swiftwing Lancer and things like Blood for Blood, like these small changes really do add up. And could put a big change into the meta very quickly. So interesting to see how it goes. Normally, I would just skip the rest of the patch notes, but there are some very important ones down here in the game rules updates. The first one is you can't burst pass anymore. Oh, you can, but your opponent can end the turn. And now, I did do like a bit of glancing on Reddit, and the people are acting like this is the biggest change in the world. I can't remember how many times we've done this over the past like month. I think the cap is at like two, maybe twice. I like specifically remember one time doing it, but certainly not a large number of times. And God, this is another place where Reddit is up in arms. You took away the burst pass. Now, granted, I will concede it is something that you can do to fuck with the AI, right? If you're a Path of Champions player, there are a lot of situations as to where you don't want to add a unit to the board, but you want to burst out a spell just because the AI performs in a certain way. And it is relevant there. I will concede that in Path of Champions it is relevant. But in the terms of playing on the ladder or playing competitively, this isn't a big deal. In terms of needing to explain this to new people and this being like, kind of not obvious and stuff, I think it's fine, right? Now you get to, there's even like the piece that I look at as to where your opponent like bursts something and you're playing on mobile and you were like staring out the window or something, just waiting on your turn to come back around. You may not, physically notice that your opponent played a card. It's like, yes, you can look at their mana and see the little spheres are gone and stuff, but there's not like a real visual indicator that your opponent did something. To whereas if you play a unit, you see it on the board. If you play a fast spell, the little circle thing goes out there and you have to acknowledge it. To where you can't just burst stuff and pass and then you just like, oh, I guess my opponent didn't do anything and let's let the turn end, or I can get this going and stuff. And so I think that this is a pretty good and valid and reasonable change. Sorry for the Path of Champions folks. I don't think it's a big deal, but just go ahead and get that out of here. I'm glad to see that change. The next one is the big one. The cast is merging with play. Basically, what this amounts to is, at least in my understanding, is let's say you have a Lux on the board and you play a Concerted Strike on your opponent's Azir, and then your opponent Rite of Negations your Concerted Strike. You used to not get that mana counted. Kind of the same thing applies if you play you have a Lux on board, you play a Concerted Strike, your opponent Glimpse Beyonds that unit away. The Concerted Strike no longer resolves because it doesn't have a target. You don't get the count for playing that mana. So in terms of Lux getting the spell mana for her final beams, final sparks, you get that now. The Heimerdinger gets the turrets. All of these things that want to see you play a spell don't lose out when you have that spell interacted with. And so I think that's positive as well. As someone that plays competitively, we're sitting up in the top 200 of Masters or so, whatever that means to anyone. There's a lot of times where I don't understand how these interactions work, and I don't feel like it's very intuitive. And so I think that this clears up a lot of the questions of what happens when I do this, especially if it's not something to where it, comprehensively works with the Oracle's Eye. Like, I hate how Cataclysm functions with the Oracle's Eye. I get why Cataclysm puts the two units in front of you and doesn't show what happens after, but it's just an odd space for that to happen. And I'm certainly in the camp of, if I'm sitting up in the top end of Masters and I don't know how an interaction works, there's just tons and tons and tons and tons of people that don't get it either. And so anything that they can do to make the games more straightforward, I think is great. And so the note says they're adjusting 61 cards. I don't know what all those cards are. I tried to do some looking through the Mobalytics card list for like cast and play and stuff, and I couldn't really get a good note, but I'm sure there'll be a good Reddit thread of someone comprehensively kind of pulling out the changes and showing what's going to change and everything. And so that's where I would keep watch on that. This is another one that might make some of these champions more relevant as well, right? This is not something that was listed as a champion change, but definitely a boost to the likes of Lux and Heimerdinger and spell slay units like Senna, stuff like that. So pretty cool. Good to know. It might be hard to fully grasp right away, so take some time to experiment. There you have it. And then on to the rest of the way. I think I watched this video on how these things work. They put some more circles and dots and things on the board. It'll probably take me a while to get used to, but that change has come in as well. tons of new skins out and about. Be sure to grab your Vi and your Jinx skin. And I thought this was pretty cool as well. I don't know if I've purchased any of the epic skins. I don't like a lot of the skins. I don't know. I'm old and I like the premium borders, and so I tend to just go prismatic. But they have been upgrading like a lot of the spells. And so, like on the newer skins, like you purchase the new Elise and she changes her broodlings to have the new picture. I think it's pretty sweet that they're willing to go back and update some of these older skins to now have fancy flip cards and fancy created cards and stuff. And so it says they went through and upgraded all of the epic ones. Might have to go and get a pool party a pool party Draven for that, but who knows? Who knows? I haven't quite decided yet. And then some new emotes and some new card backs, and that is it. And so that is the new patch. I am ready to jump in and start making some new videos with the new cards and the changes and stuff. And that will be coming at you starting on the 28th. The 28th. And so get ready for it. It's going to happen. You'll just have to watch us play some scouts until then. But nonetheless, that is going to do it. Agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments. I missed something or got something completely right, completely wrong. Let me know. I love having the discussion of the new cards and the changes as they come out. So glad to hear from you, and that's going to do it. This is Bust, and you have yourselves a good one.